Sir, thank you so very much for joining us. We are a little late, but we will make it up with lost time. We've got a couple of questions which we wanted to ask you, which a lot of people have sent to us. We also got some trivia questions as well, and we have a little surprise that we wanted to discuss with people. So with your permission, sir, we'd like to get straight in. Bindya Sethi sent this question, sir. In your opinion, how consequential is India's contribution to the United Nations?
Oh, I think it's very consequential indeed. In fact, if you go back to the founding of the UN, India was an original member. And when, for example, peacekeeping troops were required, India was one of the first countries to contribute, has remained one of the largest contributors. India led the struggle for decolonization. A majority of the members of the UN today were not free when the UN was first formed. India was in the vanguard of the struggle for their freedom, for casting off the imperialist yoke. India led the fight against apartheid in South Africa and against racial discrimination. India has been a very influential player in a number of the global agenda-setting issues, and it's always borne more than its fair share of responsibility in helping tackle many of them. From environment to human rights issues, India's voice has been heard. And now, of course, we have India becoming a significant contributor to the UN Democracy Fund. It was enough in the past, we felt, to set an example, but now we're also contributing money and resources to help other countries strengthen their democracy. So in every way, India is contributing big time to the UN success.
In follow-up to that, sir, Vaidya Raj sent this question. What are some of the experiences at the UN which have shaped you as a person?
Oh gosh, there's so much. You know, I was lucky that I joined it young. It was very much a character-shaping experience to work for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Nothing more impressive than the 3.5 years when I was heading the office in Singapore at the peak of the boat people crisis, and we had refugees fleeing Vietnam in little boats being rescued on the high seas and brought into the port, and that was up to me and my staff to get them off those ships, to negotiate with the Singapore government, to negotiate with countries of resettlement, and meanwhile to look after them in a refugee camp that we ran ourselves. Unlike in other countries in Southeast Asia where the governments ran the camps, in Singapore we were in charge. So it was an extraordinary experience. Every day I could put my head to the pillow at night knowing and feeling the things I had done had made a difference to human beings' lives. And there were lots and lots of emotional moments. I remember one young family that left in a tiny boat with a cannibalized tractor engine to power them. And of course the engine conked out. They ran out of food, they ran out of drinking water, and they were just drifting aimlessly in the South China Sea, subsisting on rainwater and hope. And they had two small babies with them, an infant and a tiny baby, and they weren't going to be able to live on rainwater. So the parents slit their fingers with a knife and made the babies suck their own blood in order to get the nutrients to survive. And you can imagine when they were rescued, they were too weak to even stand up. They had to be bodily carried onto this American ship, brought to the port. My staff and I bust every rule in the book to get them into intensive care, and then to see that same family a few months later, healthy, well-fed, well-dressed, and about to embark on new lives in a new country, that offered the kind of satisfaction that few jobs do. Years later, I had a very different kind of challenge that also shaped me in a different way, and that was dealing with what became the biggest crisis in the 1990s, the civil war in the former Yugoslavia. And I happened to be the person who had to deal with the peacekeeping operation at headquarters, though of course I'd also involved several frequent trips to the field in the midst of the ongoing war, as well as dealing with the Security Council and ambassadors of the Permanent Five. Of course, in many ways, that's what sort of made me, as it were, in terms of visibility within the UN system as a senior UN official. But at the same time, you also had the emotional pressure of working 18-hour days and yet realizing the blood was continuing to flow. So some of those experiences never leave you. There too, I saw some of the depths to which human beings can sink. I mean, I traveled through the front lines. I remember the beginning of the war when it was the Serbs and the Croats fighting each other. And I got to a Croatian battle headquarters, and the commander showed me a photograph of a row of dead babies and said, look what these horrible Serbs have done to us. They've killed our children. Here's this picture as an evidence of their brutality. And then a couple of days later, I go through the front lines and visit the Serb commander, and he shows me the identical same picture and says, look what these terrible Croats have done, they're killing our babies. And you realize here are two people who are so alike, impossible to tell each other apart visually, and they were literally killing each other every day. And it was a horrendous experience, but at the same time something which deeply impacted me.
So there's a, when you're in the UN, you obviously get all kinds of memorabilia. Was one of those things a bulletproof vest, considering some of the difficulties you faced?
I wore a bulletproof vest on many occasions, but I never got to keep it. Took it off and gave it back to the commander of the company that was protecting me when I got on the plane to leave Sarajevo, which is where I needed to wear it.
So the next question is slightly different. It's about your career as a politician. Vinay Kumar Dokhania has asked this question. What are some of the most significant contributions you have made as a member of parliament of Thiruvananthapuram?
That's right. I mean, one of the things as a member of parliament is you really have two roles.
Yeah.
You have to service your own constituency, the people who've elected you,
Yeah.
and you also have to play a role in parliament on national issues. So very often it's the latter that tend to be seen. So when I make a speech on behalf of my party on the budget, or I attack the government, or I move a bill, or I oppose a bill, or whatever, then that's what gets nationwide attention. But in Thiruvananthapuram, what matters is what has this guy done for us lately? And I'm very proud to say I've devoted the time required to attend to every single need. We deal with upwards of 250 to 300 petitions a week. We generate letters to ministers and ministries to get things done. We rescue people who are caught in difficulties in foreign countries. We repatriate bodies. We move our embassies to expedite certain cases and problems. We have been able to intervene in everything from cases of people wrongfully arrested who needed to be released to people who needed other kinds of special services. We have at the same time had to deal with big ticket issues. So for example, there was a national highway bypass project in Thiruvananthapuram all the way to the Tamil Nadu border, which had been conceived 40 years ago but never got off the ground. They had actually put the marker stones in 1974, and then the thing had collapsed, the budget was never approved, the thing was never done. And the people, I didn't know about this until I came to campaign in 2009, and people came to me and said, with tears in their eyes, that they couldn't actually even sell or mortgage their land or borrow money against their land to get their daughters married or whatever, because as long as the government stones were on their land, people said the government can acquire your land anytime, we can't take the risk. So they said either cancel the project and get these stones removed, or get the project done. And I took it on as a challenge. It wasn't easy. It took hundreds of meetings, phone calls, meetings with ministers, meetings with bureaucrats. But at the end of 4 years of effort, it became a reality. And before the 2009 elections, the first checks changed hands from our then chief minister to the beneficiaries who were now able to unload their land, which then was to be the site of the national highway bypass. That bypass is making good progress, but inevitably I've had to stay engaged, because one place or the other, somebody wants an intersection, some other community claims it's cut off from its graveyard, or cut off from its church, or cut off from its school, and all of these things require constant interventions. I've made literally dozens of visits to various points along the way, but the highway is moving along, and it'll change the lives of generations yet unborn. That's been something I've been very proud of. At the same time, I've been proud of some high-tech contributions, getting in some major businesses to come in and establish themselves in our techno park.
Such as?
Oracle, I conducted a video conference with Oracle and persuaded them to come and establish a presence there. When Ernst & Young were pulling out, I got them to change their mind, not just stay, but expand their presence.
Oh, wow.
I was involved in the first attempt to persuade Nissan to relocate their IT headquarters, and Nissan is now doing it. As a result, in their wake, Tech Mahindra is coming, Fujitsu is coming. So we're seeing a lot of growth around that in the Techno City area. I fought for a particular multi-use development called the Taurus project, which therefore is also going to create office space, as well as entertainment spaces, malls, and so on, which will change the quality of life in Thiruvananthapuram. I played a hand in getting a super specialty hospital into my constituency. I got money from the central government for a mental health facility.
MP lads or?
No, these are all central government funds. One of the big jobs of an MP is lobbying the central government.
Right.
And then, of course, there are the MP lads funds, which are, frankly, in Kerala, very minor, because they're 5 crores a year for an MP, 25% are reserved for SC/ST projects. So your general expenditure as an MP covering 7 MLA constituencies is just 50 lakhs per MLA constituency, whereas the Kerala MLA gets 6 crores from the state government. So he has 12 times as much money to spend in the same area as I do. But these MLAs, they're very chalak and chatur. They say to people who come with things they don't want to do, they say, oh, I'm a small guy, go to the MP, he'll do it for you. And the poor MP has only 50 lakhs, the MLA has 12 times as much, but I end up trying to distribute that 50 lakhs in small projects, bus stops, Anganwadis. In particular, I was the first MP to bring high mast lights into Kerala.
Oh, wow.
Each high mast light in those days cost about 4.5 lakhs. It's now about 6. But you ask a woman what it's like to walk in the dark,
Yeah.
and she'll tell you how useful a high mast light is in some areas. And so all of those things are part of what one does.
So in follow-up on the MP Lads question, how important is it for MPs to be transparent in the MP Lads funds that they allocate?
I believe in 100% transparency. I've published throughout my time as MP the accounts of every penny we've spent. I don't believe in anything but full accountability on this. This is taxpayers' money. And while an MP, strictly speaking, works in Parliament, when he's spending money locally, the local people have a right to know what he spent it on, and if necessary, to complain if it's not been properly spent. So I have always published the accounts, and I'm very proud to say that every single project has been declared to the public, and we continue to do that.
I remember, when I think this was the second year I was working with you, there was that very tragic incident of that plane that took off from Trivandrum and crash landed in another airport. And I just remember how on the ball, the entire team was in Trivandrum, in Delhi. You were getting calls from bereaved families with absolutely no information. And at that point, your profile as a member of parliament, as a former UN official, your proximity to world leaders really came into full force, because within a couple of phone calls, hotlines were set up, communication was exchanged. I can't imagine any other member of parliament, I'm not saying this because I have a bias, but only a person of your profile and your experience and your personal contribution and devotion could have done what was done that time.
You're very kind. I don't think I could accomplish anything without a very effective team, both on the ground in Thiruvananthapuram and here in Delhi to backstop my work. I don't think any of us can do anything on our own. We need people to get things moving. I'm very proud of the way in which my team worked, for example, during the recent Kerala floods, where the office became a center for raising, receiving and distributing assistance. Thiruvananthapuram itself was not terribly badly affected, but many other districts, we became a funnel to get goods out, and it was entirely the astonishingly hard work of our young people on the team. And we continue to have, I'm glad to say, a very idealistic and motivated team doing that.
Well, sir, from what I hear from the team, you inspire them to be that idealistic.
You're very kind, thank you.
So the next question is from Vaidya Singh. Of the many private member bills that you've introduced, are there some that you feel deserve more attention?
Well, every bill that I do has a lot of thought and preparation that goes into it. My legislative assistants work hard on it. They often consult outside NGOs and experts. So what we put in is a product of serious work. So I don't in any way want to diminish any single one of these bills. I believe they're all important, and we don't just fling them out carelessly. They all represent a lot of thought. And they usually follow my own philosophical conviction that our role ought to be to expand the freedoms that are available to Indians within the Constitution and through the Constitution. And at the same time, they often incorporate ideas of how we could do some things better. So some of those bills involving issues of freedom, the Section 377 bill, which was of course shot down, but which, as we know, the judiciary has now taken care of. The sedition bill, I've tried to redefine what sedition should be, that it should only relate to acts of violence or incitement to violence and should not criminalize mere dissent or criticism of the government. All of these things, very frankly, is something that we need to see being done more and more in the country. But if you look at some of the other bills, I'm pretty proud of them too. Rights for domestic workers. We all have domestic workers. How well do we treat them, and what rights do we recognize they have? How much leave do they get? How much freedom do they have to lead their lives? If you look at some of the sort of things that affect every individual, I've recommended that the Board of Film Censorship not be allowed to censor any films. It should only be allowed to certify a film. So if it's no longer allowed to cut words, cut scenes, but it can say, if you keep the scene, we're going to give you a certificate that restricts it only to people above 18, or something else that restricts it to people, and so on, then you end up not allowing a bunch of unelected censors to dictate aesthetics for the nation. Again, it's a kind of creative freedom we're trying to protect. All of these things are out there, and I have a number of bills pending, and some larger policy ones too. I believe very strongly that it's shameful that India does not have an asylum and refugee law. I worked for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, so I know how important that is. India is on the executive committee of UNHCR and is the only country
Without
on that committee which doesn't have such a law. It really is a disgrace, and I know that the resistance comes entirely from our Home Ministry bureaucracy that wants the freedom to move on an ad hoc way whenever it suits them.
Yes.
I've spoken on this issue to the Home Minister, to the Home Secretary, to 2 Ministers of State for Home, and I've had no joy at all. But I feel putting that bill out there and saying this is something we need to do, I hope will stir some consciences.
So just following up on that question, the next question is from someone you know very well, Semi Ahuja. Do you think the BJP is fundamentally opposed to critical, constructive debate in Parliament?
Well, they don't seem to have much interest in it. First of all, there are 2 or 3 things that are very, very striking. One is that never in this 4.5 years of BJP rule have they ever actually managed to pay any attention to any suggestion that's come in an opposition debate. I remember when we were in power, for example, Ghulam Nabi Azad, then Health Minister, introducing a bill, and one of the opposition MPs from, I think, the BJP, who was a doctor, said these are 1 or 2 things you could do to improve the bill, and he promptly suspended the vote on it, took the bill back, introduced these improvements, and brought it back to the House. That's the way a parliamentary debate should work. We should actually, in fact, be contributing to reflection and decision before laws are made. Doesn't happen at all under the BJP. Even for the simplest, most routine, most obvious things, they end up just cracking the whip, and the BJP has to vote raucously and without thought or reflection exactly on the bill as presented by the government. And there's example after example of that, which I think is disappointing. Secondly, the BJP has ensured that Parliament meets much less than ever before. I mean, every year of BJP rule, the number of days of Parliament sittings keep shrinking. And that, to my mind, is a great pity, because we don't actually have, as a result, enough opportunities to actually have serious debates. And again, as I say, these debates are not valued. Third, we've seen too many examples of the government actually trying to stifle debate. For example, not once has an adjournment motion been admitted. Not once has even only once has a no confidence motion been admitted. But all of these things could actually have permitted a debate on an issue that was exercising many parties in the opposition, and it would have been healthy for the nation to see these issues being debated instead having unhappy opposition parties creating disruption in the well of the House. So to my mind, the government could have done a much better job of actually encouraging healthy debate in Parliament, knowing full well that they command a majority afterwards. It's not that they're going to be suddenly voted out of office in any of these matters, but at least the debate means these issues are aired and the nation gets to know exactly what's on the minds of the opposition MPs they've elected to Parliament.
So just going to go to the next question, sort of segueing from the point you've just raised. Rahul Agarwal asked this question. We've seen that the government is trying to subvert the autonomy of institutions in the country, such as the CBI, the RBI, the Election Commission. What impact do you think this has on the common citizen?
Well, I have an entire essay on the subject in my book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, because it's really dismaying. Right. The strength of our democracy is our democratic institution building. After all, from the days of Nehruji, a serious effort has been made to preserve the independence and the integrity of these institutions, because political parties will come and go, they'll win and lose elections, but the system always continues, and the institutions therefore have to have a reputation for being above petty politics, for actually being beyond the control of the individual who happens to be occupying the most powerful position in the country today. Unfortunately, for the last 4.5 years, we've seen a systematic move in the opposite direction. We've seen the independence and integrity of many institutions being compromised. The ones you mentioned, the Election Commission, which mysteriously decided to grant the government of Gujarat 12 days more to give away freebies before the official announcement of Gujarat election dates. The Supreme Court, whose 4 judges announced to the press that there was a danger for our democracy in the way in which the judiciary was functioning. Unprecedented. The Information Commission, large numbers of vacancies, mountains of pending backlog of applications, completely hollowing out the meaning of right to information for our citizens. No Lokpal has been appointed, despite the BJP having piggybacked on Anna Hazare's campaign to agitate for it when we were in power. You look down the list, the Reserve Bank of India, completely silent on demonetization, even though it was pushed through by the unilateral fiat of the Prime Minister. The Cabinet completely irrelevant to most of these decisions, often being informed rather than taking collective responsibility for some of the major decisions of this government. And even the fourth estate, the media, which was proud of its independence in our time, that actually in many ways can be credited with bringing down the UPA government or blamed for doing so because of their almost hysterical reporting of various lurid corruption scandals and so on and so forth. The fact is that in this government they've been completely tamed. All it seems to take is a call to a proprietor and editors suddenly get fired. Articles incriminating people close to the ruling dispensation mysteriously disappear from the websites of mainstream publications. Where is the independence and the freedom of the press in our country heading? All of these things cause us a great deal of worry, and I believe that if we want to preserve our democracy, we need to preserve free, independent, autonomous institutions in all their integrity and not let them completely be taken over by the government of the day.
We're just going to change slightly to your avatar as an author. This is from Nisha Singh. You've written extensively on the great Indian leaders. What's your take on the discourse as a whole in the country, and who do you hold responsible for it?
No, I think discourse has become very coarse, has become very cheap, confrontational, ugly in terms of language. I think I was talking to a fairly senior individual the other day who was saying that in his rather long lifetime of being involved with and following our politics, he's never seen this kind of language being used, which is actually a rather sad commentary already. As somebody who grew up in India and then went abroad for many years, I was always struck by how things that when I was young were not even things you were capable of thinking and certainly would not say even behind closed doors, were now routinely being said on public stages and public platforms on television stations. So there is, to my mind, a real loss of decorum, a real loss of decency in the way in which some of the horrendous expressions are being used. I think I blame principally politicians, because when the ruling party itself and the leaders of our government have stooped as low as some people have, then they set an example for lesser politicians to emulate. And then secondarily, I do blame the media, because I think the media, television in particular, in fact, I essentially blame television for having allowed things to be said and done that should never have been allowed into people's living rooms. Really, thoughts and language that are truly shame-making. And this in turn, of course, as social media has come along, has gotten much worse with all the trolling and the nastiness and vituperation that social media, particularly when anonymous handles are allowed to function, makes possible.
So, sir, 2019, millions of first-time voters, first time really participating in enacting the democratic franchise. What would be one line that you'd like to give to them? Because they do look at you as an inspiration and an influencer.
I believe the 2019 election is a battle for India's soul. There's a real struggle going on for defining and redefining India. What's our country all about? Are we a country for everybody, irrespective of their caste, their religion, their dress, their food habits? Or are we somehow going to reduce ourselves, as some want us to be, into a Hindu Rashtra? These are fundamental issues. The freedoms of our country, the strength of our democracy, the integrity of our history, and indeed the aspirations for our future are all at stake in 2019. So we are not just battling to stop a government that has really done great damage and violence to our country's institutions, its economy, and its values. We're also battling to save India's soul.
So talking about battling for India, sports is one of those great things where the entire country unites and it manages to come together towards that outcome, whether it's a cricket match or a football match. And I know personally how much you love cricket. So we're going to slightly segue into a more fun question. If you were a cricketer, which Indian captain would you want to play under?
I think probably I'd want to be the captain myself. That's my usual fondness. Even when I wasn't the most talented cricketer in the teams I played for, I managed to get the captaincy for whatever reason. But no, if I had to play under someone, probably the Nawab Patodi. He was a tremendously charismatic and dashing figure who set a great example as a tigerish fielder himself and a very courageous batsman. So I think that would probably be a fun person to play under, because one would hope to impress him with some similar qualities when one was that age, of course, not anymore.
Now, sir, this question I think is going to probably go viral. So let's, on a Sunday afternoon, you're off work, you relax.
There's no such day. There is no Sunday afternoon for an MP from the Lok Sabha because every single day is a work day.
So, sir, in a hypothetical Sunday afternoon, two questions. What's your guilty pleasure movie and what's your guilty pleasure food?
Okay, I'm embarrassed to admit I haven't seen a movie since Bajrangi Bhaijan.
Oh my God.
I mean, that was the last film I saw. I still haven't seen the sequel to Bahubali, which I think I saw the same weekend as Bajrangi Bhaijan, the original. So my problem is, of course, I shouldn't say problem. I've been a productive writer as a result. I don't spend 3 hours going to movies, and I don't actually spend a whole lot of time indulging in other pleasures, including, sadly, reading. I used to read much more than I do now. Nowadays, I only read the books that I've been asked to review because then I'm forced to do them. Otherwise, I just concentrate on the kind of work-oriented reading. But yeah, a guilty pleasure movie would be something that was escapist.
Okay.
I'm not sure that, even though I'm a great admirer of Satyajit Ray and so on, whether I really want to go to the cinema in order to be terribly elevated intellectually. I want to go to have a good time. So yeah, something like a Bajrangi Bhajan, something like a Phantom. I don't know if you've seen this Saif Ali Khan movie. That was a fantastic film. Undeservedly a failure. I thought it deserves much more recognition in this country. And fun, Chennai Express. All the sort of escapist entertainment is what I really would enjoy. And food pleasures. Well, I indulge in my guilty pleasures already, and I'll confess to them right off, not just on Sunday afternoons. I have idlis every morning. I can't live without them. And I manage to sneak in a chocolate or two in the course of every day. I usually don't need an excuse to have a chocolate. So those are my two big guilty pleasures.
Anything else besides idlis and chocolate? Something that people don't know about?
Well, I have a weakness for pizza with specific toppings that I like, but I don't do that every day or even every week. You can't really be in a position to eat that kind of thing every week. But yeah, I mean, my toppings are artichoke hearts, sun-dried tomatoes, onions and mushrooms.
Wow.
And of course, a generous sprinkling of chili flakes on top.
Well, that's actually wonderful. It's surprised that you're able to do so much. Most people, I think, most of the interactions we've had, I think one of the first questions that comes up is where do you get the time to do so many different things? Whether it's writing your books, writing your articles, representing your constituents, representing the country.
I honestly think you only have to find time when you've lost it in the first place. Okay. So if you've actually used every second that God gives you for something constructive and purposeful, then you don't have to worry about where you found the time. It's there, it's yours. Use it well.
Well, sir, you're leading by example on that. Finally, sir, we're going into sort of a rapid fire round. Describe the following people in one word.
One word.
One word.
All right.
Pandit Nehru.
Awe-inspiring.
Muhammad Rafi.
Melodious and mellifluous.
Sorry, sir.
One, melodious.
Okay. But mellifluous, just for the sake of us, what does that mean?
That means just smooth flowing with words, with the way the words flow down.
Rani of Jhansi.
Courageous, indomitable.
Dr. B.R. Ambedkar.
Constitutionalist, but that's almost too much. Learned, amazingly learned man.
Mary Kom.
Combative, pugilistic, courageous also, in a different way from the Rani of Jhansi.
Oh, and Madhubala.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Is that a cliche?
No, I mean, I agree. I think, now this one is going to be interesting. Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Paradoxical.
Well, sir, thank you so much. But before we go, before our conversation, we had a little trivia competition. We put out a question, and a lot of people have answered. The question was, when were you first published? And I'd like you to answer that question, sir.
10 years old, when I appeared in print. It was a short story in a newspaper that came out only on Sundays called the Bharat Jyoti, the Sunday edition of the Free Press Journal. And then shortly thereafter, sort of what I thought of as a novel, but really wasn't long enough for that. The first installment of a 6-part serialization in the Junior Statesman began a week before my 11th birthday. So those are my 2 published pieces before I turned 11.
I wonder what I was doing at 10, probably playing football or having ice cream.
I'm sure you had more fun.
Well, no, sir, I try to, but For those of you who have answered that question correctly, please follow the INC handles, because you might be lucky enough to get a copy of this book signed by Dr. Tharoor to you, Paradoxical Prime Minister.
Great, thank you.
Before we go, thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Tharoor. I know you've been so busy and you've been very kind to us and honest. We appreciate that, sir.
Enjoyed it, thank you.
Next week, coming up on In Conversation with Mr. Jyoti Aditya Scindia, Member of Parliament from Madhya Pradesh. My name is Alim Jiveri. Thank you for joining us. Good evening.